All right, welcome back, everyone. So previous week, we went over chapters 10 and 11. And we ended at chapter 11 with the Christian bodies in Antioch, Paul going to Antioch, and then we talked about Cornelius last week in chapter 11 about how the church is now growing into a place where we're going to see Gentile conversion. We'll start with chapter 12 and pick off here. Here's a shorter chapter, and it has to do with the Christians, what's going on in Jerusalem, and the persecutions that are going on there. But before we actually dive into the text, I wanted to do a quick little background information, because we hear about names sometimes of the apostles, and we don't know, kind of associate these names, who is who. Sometimes it's confusing on which ones we're talking about, and because we're going to speak about a few different apostles today. So on the board, I wrote out, you guys, the 12 apostles. I'm sure you guys have heard of these names, but if you put on the spot, it's hard probably to lay them all out. I had a bishop who was my scripture teacher in seminary. He says, you're going to get a little kid who's going to ask you, who are those people in the icon? And it's going to be embarrassing when you can't tell them who they are. So one of his things, like, you have to be able to lay out all the apostles, at least the 12 apostles for us. So Simon Peter, we know he's the leader of the apostles. Andrew, the first called, and he's also the brother, and I have here, I didn't put these in any specific order, John the theologian, James and John are the brothers of Zebedee. They're the brothers. James and John are brothers. We have Philip here, and then Bartholomew is also in the scriptures as Nathaniel. So there's 12 apostles, but there's way more names for these people, as you'll know, so it gets confusing. We know Thomas and Matthew, and then there's another James. James is Yaakobos, right? So it's basically, in Greek. So that's where we get James from, but it's what in Hebrew? It's Jacob. So obviously, Jacob is a very popular Hebrew name. So this is why we hear James all the time. It's Jacob, okay? So we have Jacob, the son of Alphaeus, okay? James, the son of Alphaeus. So you're going to see sometimes it's referred to on this side, James the Greater, and James, sometimes you'll hear James the Lesser, and it has to do with their stature and size, not that one was better than the other. But oftentimes it's just Alphaeus is by the father, son of Alphaeus. And then we have Jude, who's also known as Thaddeus, okay? And Jude is known as, in scripture, we also know him as the James, a brother of James. And not one of those James, but the James who is not a 12 apostle, which we may always think is the brother of the Lord. He was not one of the 12 apostles, okay? He was one of what we call the 70 apostles, the outer group of apostles, disciples of Christ. So this is interesting. Jude he called himself the brother of James. Even though he was the brother of the Lord. These were James and Jude were brothers, but he would never refer himself as the brother of the Lord because he wanted to kick Jesus out of the family at one point and didn't want to give him any inheritance. James was kind and charitable to Christ as a stepbrother. And so even though he became a disciple and a follower, he thought himself never worthy to be called the brother of the Lord. Okay? So, and then we have Simon, the zealot, and then Paul. As we know, Paul wasn't in the Gospels himself, but became pretty much the apostles. And by tradition, he is one of the 12. And the one who replaced Matthias who replaced Judas, is one of the 70. Because he became, as we know, we don't hear anything about Matthias. Christ himself chose Paul to be an apostle. Okay? And then we have the 70, and some of the notable ones that we hear is James, the brother of the Lord, who became the first bishop of Jerusalem. Luke and Mark, who wrote the Gospels. Okay, Barnabas, Matthias, and we've heard about Philip the deacon that went down to Samaria and baptized the Ethiopian eunuch. Stephen, the first martyr. And there's a list that goes 70 of them. We hear them all throughout especially the book of Acts, where Paul's